Greetings and welcome to the Policy and Finance Committee meeting of May 19th, 2014. We have a handful, actually there's two things on the agenda. The first being the election of the chair of this committee. I would be happy to open the floor for nominations. Councilman Smith.
As I'm new to the chair, and I believe you're the only returning member of this chair, I would nominate Mr. Manspeaker for chair.
I will second that, but I will correct that there's two of us returning, but I am used to 2-year terms and 2-year chairs, and I think that that's a good practice, so I'm going to second that motion.
I apologize for that.
That's all right.
I would accept the nomination. Thank you very much. Are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? Seeing none? Seeing none, I apparently am the chair of the Policy and Finance Committee. Thank you very much to both of you. I appreciate your support. And now we will move on to discussion, code of ethics and transparency. And just to give an idea of the catalyst of this agenda item, as we went through issues with the council over the past 6 months to a year, it became apparent that maybe some rules needed to be applied to council members, and as it stands currently, we don't really have any rules. The second part of that transparency is that we are constantly bombarded with the concept of transparency, but yet we consistently fail to define what that is. And so it's easy for someone to say you're not being transparent and not be able to back that up, because how do you prove something that didn't happen? So the reality that I'm looking at is that if we define as an elected body what transparency is, then we have a standard by which we can live by. Obviously, we already have the Kansas Open Meetings Act and the Kansas Open Records Act, but I think that as a body, we could actually pass a resolution that's a little bit more concrete and specific about the work that we do, and is hopefully supported by the entire council. So with that, I will turn it over to the City Attorney, Mr. Sublett, to discuss just sort of some ideas behind the Code of Ethics and Transparency.
Thank you. Chairman Manspeaker come probably 6 weeks ago, I think, to the city manager and said this is something he wanted to discuss, and I was assigned as the staff person to assist with this. My goal today is that when we leave here, that staff has some direction of how this body would like to proceed and what they'd like to look at, if anything. And I prepared a PowerPoint, and then you also have some attachments, and I'll kind of reference those as we go through this. I think on page 2 of the PowerPoint, it's important, just a couple of important points. One of the issues that's come up before is are council members city employees? No, you are not city employees. So we have policies and procedures that affect city employees that are separate from the council. So sometimes I get that question, is council, do they have to abide by city policies and procedures? No. Kind of goes to the second point, is you are a self-governing body. That as a self-governing body, you are the one that determine what your rules are. You're the ones that determine what your code of ethics should be, what that process should be. That it's not the city attorney, it's not the city manager, it's you as the elected officials. And that's the last one, is you are elected officials. I've also got the question in different situations, can we have this person removed as council member? No. That you are elected officials, you're elected by your constituents. The only people that I'm aware of that have the ability to remove an elected official is if there was a petition, if they committed certain acts and there was a petition to have them removed, or the district attorney or the attorney general. That if there was disagreement, even if everybody on the council wanted somebody removed, that's not something that you have the power to do as a council. So I just wanted to kind of clarify those 3 points as we move forward. So where are we today? Councilman Manspeaker had referenced that we don't have many rules or a code of ethics. We have a code of ethics. It's what's called, it's an aspirational code of ethics. And your first kind of attachment is Resolution 7473. It says at the top, and just to give some history, in 2004, the council adopted the Haynes Resolution, and that's what's in front of you, and established an aspirational code of ethics and policy for elected officials and city employees. The resolution contained no enforcement measures. So what you have in front of you is the current code of ethics, but there were no enforcement measures. In 2007, the council adopted a formal code of ethics that established rules, mandated compliance, and contained penalties for violations. So in 2007, there was an adoption so that there would be penalties for violation, that there would be an investigative procedure. In 2008, the council repealed the code of ethics contained in that resolution. The Haynes resolution was never repealed, so it continues in its original form as aspirational. So there was the aspirational code of ethics, which we have, then there was some enforcement, and then that was repealed. So what we have today is this Haynes resolution number 7473. And again, it's aspirational. It's what we, what the council wants to aspire to. There's no mechanism for investigation. There's no mechanism for any formal consequence if there's a violation.
If I may,
Yes.
what were the penalties on the ordinance 18836?
Public censure.
Just public censure, so it would be the body would censure the elected official?
Yeah.
And so was there an investigation conducted, or how do you reach the point of public censure?
I'm not sure how the previous ordinance did their investigation. I just know that there was the ability to have a public censure, but we can look at, as we go through this, different ways
Okay.
that could be formulated. On the next page in the PowerPoint, I just kind of go through what's in our current resolution. That first is respect for the Constitution and the law, that we accurately apply ordinances, eliminate obsolete policies, eliminate discrimination, correct mismanagement, respect confidentiality, protect employees, and apply constitutional principles. Now, there's obviously more words in there than that, but I'm just kind of summarizing it as we go along. The second section is what's called serve the public interest. And that'd be on page 2. It starts on line 31 through 43. Support the public's right to know, assist citizens, provide citizen responses, invite full cooperation, use reasonable discretion when applying ordinances and resolution, oppose unlawful discrimination, and use compassion and fairness. The next section is demonstrate personal integrity. That's honesty and truthfulness, credit others whenever it's due, avoid conflicts of interest. This would be fiduciary conflicts of interest. Respect for all, responsibility if you make a mistake, avoiding partisanship, have the best interest of the city, and stay within the adopted budget. The next section, which starts on line 60 on page 3, is promote an ethical organization. Have open communication, seek to promote the public interest and public good, provide employees with due process, avoid arbitrary and capricious action, and be accountable in your personal conduct. Then the last section is striving for professional excellence. So encourage competence, remain current, encourage participation in professional activities, and improve public service. So when you look at, and I know that's just a brief summary, but when you look at our current code of ethics, it's pretty broad, it's pretty kind of overarching. It doesn't have a definition section that defines, for example, what do we mean by honesty, what do we mean by truthfulness. what does it mean? The public's right to know. There's several different areas where we have broad overarching concepts, but really no specific language. And that is kind of reflective of an aspirational code of ethics, that this is what a body aspires to do versus a mandatory code of ethics. And the next page of the PowerPoint kind of separates those. Mandatory, you're going to define the basic level of ethical behavior. So what is at the fundamental level, what is the ethical behavior you expect? People act in compliance with the minimum standard of practice to comply, and obedience to the rules would avoid any sort of public censure. So a mandatory code of ethics is we're going to set the rules out. Basically, this is what you can't do. And if you do this, then there could be a consequence for a behavior. And the next page is aspirational. And those are more demonstrate respect for the position, maintain the welfare of the city as the primary concern, and consider how actions reflect on the city as a whole. Instead of focusing on how to avoid a censure, aspirational ethics assist individuals to think about doing what's in the best interest of the city. You see, you can kind of look at those and see the difference, that aspirational, this is what we're striving to do, this is what we're going to do. Mandatory, this is what we're not going to do, essentially. And there'll be consequences for that. And then on the next page, I'd sent out last week some codes of ethics from Wichita, Overland Park, Manhattan, Wyandotte County, just for you to look at beforehand. And what I've found when I look at other cities is Kansas has a mix. Wichita, Overland Park, and Manhattan have a short publicized code of ethics, which is aspirational without a formal process for enforcing violations. Olathe, Kansas City, Missouri, and Wyandotte have passed mandatory code of ethics with enforcement. For example, in Olathe, there's a 7-step process they go through to enforcing their code of ethics. Wyandotte County's, I think, was 25 pages long in terms of what their code of ethics was and what the enforcement was. Kansas City, Missouri is similar. So as you can see, if you're going to have something that's aspirational, it's going to be much shorter. If you want something that's mandatory and enforceable, it has to be much longer. It has to be detailed. Just some other states. California has a state law which mandates an enforceable code of ethics for city council. Scottsdale, Arizona has a mandatory code of ethics, which was in response to a petition where they go through not only the code of ethics, but what's an executive session. They go through transparency, Comm, Cora. There's an entire 2 or 3 pages that kind of outlines what that is and what that means. And last is Asheville, North Carolina, and I put this in your packet as well. It's the longer of the attachments. And when I was looking at this, they do something that I think is interesting, is they have kind of the aspirational code of ethics up front. This is what we aspire to. And then there's also some mandatory rules within there as well. So they start with a really good definition section, begin with what they aspire to, and then they go through what the procedures are for both censure and criminal acts. So it's not quite as long as the Wyandotte and the Kansas City, Missouri codes of ethics, but it hits on the kind of both areas. This is what we aspire to, and this is what we won't accept as a council. So on the last page is decisions, and this is kind of where I think this body comes in, is looking at the questions. Are you okay with what we currently have? Do we not want to make any changes? Are you okay with the current process? Do you want to include transparency or some language involving transparency into a code of ethics? If not, do we want to look at a mandatory or an aspirational code or a mix of those? If you're going to have a mandatory code, what kind of investigatory body are you going to have? What kind of authority do we want them to have? What's the investigatory process look like? What are the penalties? And do you want to address however you would define it as frivolous complaints? That if you start having complaints going back and forth that don't have a basis, do you want to address those? I know that was kind of a quick overview, but it really is determining, for this body to determine what they think they want. If you want to make changes to what we currently have, if you'd like to keep what we currently have, I just think it's open for discussion about how this body would like staff to proceed.
Okay. Does anybody want to kick off the conversation?
Go ahead.
Councilman Schmidt?
Thank you for that presentation, City Attorney. I have a couple of questions on your decisions page at the end.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about an investigative authority. What are these other communities that have mandatory codes using primarily as their investigative authority, or is it a mix?
It's a mix. Some of them use an ethics committee, that there's a body of people that is made up of the city council, which is the ethics committee that do an investigation. Some use a law enforcement body. Some are assisted by the city attorney. And just to give you my opinion on that, I don't think it should be the city attorney. I think there's some inherent conflicts that can arise. In terms of assisting a body, I think just like any committee, the city attorney's office could assist that body. But in terms of doing the investigation, I would really advise not to go down that route. But you could establish a committee. It could be a mix of whatever the council desires it to be.
Do you know of any communities that, I agree with the potential conflict using your own city attorney. I think that would also apply to the police department too. Do you know any communities where they might have, say, a relationship with like the county where we would turn investigative issues over to either the police department or the county attorney, the sheriff's department or the county attorney, and maybe in turn they would, if they had investigations into their own, they would turn them over, like a reciprocal relationship?
I haven't seen that as it relates to the council and a code of ethics. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but there'll be incidents where if there's a criminal act that has gone on that we think there'll be a conflict, we contact the sheriff's department or the district attorney to investigate that. But I haven't seen that in terms of a code of ethics where they rely on a county agency.
Well, the reason I bring that up is I like the idea of having, a mandatory code of ethics with some enforcement teeth in it and with investigative authority. I prefer that investigative authority to be conducted in a professional manner by people who do those kinds of things rather than by an elected ethics committee. And I think that might be something that we would like to, or that I would like to explore, is some sort of relationship with an independent professional investigative agency. I have one other question, if that's all right, and that is the frivolous complaints, which I could see being a problem, and I think it's been a problem in the past here. Are there particular mechanisms that you're aware of to define what is frivolous and what is not, or who gets to make that decision?
I think it would be a complaint just like it would be any other. This is how I've seen it. I've only seen one other city that has it. And it's a complaint just like any other complaint. Somebody makes a claim that the complaint was frivolous, and the standard is there was no probable cause for making the complaint, that there was no evidence that anybody could put forward, no credible evidence that anybody could put forward that the complaint had any basis.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really like Olathe's. It looks like they've had it in effect since '98. And talking about the complaints, they, at the next regular scheduled council meeting, After the 7-day answer period, the city attorney shall present the complaint and answer, and then the city council determines if they're gonna dismiss the complaint, determine further investigation of the complaint, or take action as the city council determines appropriate. So, and in reading through Olathe's information here, it does, do you know, have you talked to Olathe and find out what their code of ethics and transparency, how it's worked since they've had it for quite a while?
I haven't personally talked to them. I just pulled what their code was and what their code of ethics. The actual code is in the front. Is on
Okay.
the front, and then
Right,
the rest of it is really their process. Is
right, and it looks
majority
pretty
of it.
good. Also, I would suggest that we ask the League of Municipalities to determine if they've ever done any reviews or research on code of ethics and the transparency issues. And then I wanted to respond to Councilman Schmidt's comment about an ethics committee. We, as elected officials, we are under the Kansas Commission on Ethics. So we would have to answer to any of those complaints also, which there is a process to file complaints on that. And then I kind of wanted to find out if, I mean, I know probably what started all this discussion on code of ethics and transparency and everything, but I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page of doing the right thing. And I saw that in what we already have is a resolution that was passed, that was introduced by Councilmember Bill Haynes, that we promote an ethical organization, provide open communication, and be creative with dedication. And then on the second page, on page 4, it said that, on page 2 previously, recognize and support the public's right to know in city's business. You know, I've been in politics for a long time, and I know that there are meetings that go on, but I just want to make sure that when we're talking about code of ethics and transparency, that we don't have meetings with staff, the financial staff, the city manager, and 3 select committee member or council members doing that. So does this address that idea that we're not, you know, the idea is that we're providing open communication? Would that be spelled out somewhere? And if it's not spelled out in here, is there any city that we could ask in the league that is covering that? I think there was one comment, work with the city manager. That was in Overland Park. Work with the city manager through council structure, not on an individual council manager basis. So that if the city manager is meeting with 2 or 3 members, 3 or more members, that then is extended as an invitation to all other council members that they be included. And I'm specifically referring to a member that had informed me that after the last council meeting, there was the city manager and staff with 3 council members at Terry's Bar and Grill, and I just don't want that happening again, especially if it's the financial staff and we're talking about budget issues. So I want to make sure, Chad, that we're including the code of ethics and transparency, that we do have a city manager structure, but we are including all of the council in that structure.
One thing that we'd have to balance any proposed code of ethics with is our charter ordinance.
Okay.
So I would want the opportunity to look at our charter ordinance. And also there, you have to balance, you can't control what people do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That people have a right to their weekends and their friendships and their relationships. And I'm not commenting on any specific instance, but I think you have to keep that in a broad perspective, that in my role as the city attorney, in council's role, that the code of ethics really applies to when you're representing yourself as a council member acting in that professional role. But anything that we put together, I'm going to need to compare against the charter ordinance and make sure that we don't have any issues,
'Cause we do want to be
conflicts between the
transparent.
code and the charter ordinance.
Okay.
No, and I would say, I think that's the intent. I think that's why we're here,
Okay.
is that you have an opportunity, if there are things you feel are not working in a specific way, we can address that in this policy. I think there may be, what's the word I'm looking for? I think people, elected officials, at least in my experience, think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. In my experience, there really isn't a lot of smoke and mirrors, but being able to dispel that to the public is very difficult. And so setting our own level of standard to say, I've lived to this standard, if there's something exceptional here, please point it out to me so that I can correct it or address it or whatever else. But if we have no standard and we have no governance, we have no direction, then we can just stand around and point fingers at each other rather than base it in some concrete language.
I
So I think you're right on the Overland Park stuff and on the Olathe stuff. And I enjoyed what you had to say. Looking at all the questions, there's a lot of information.
Where?
And so I guess my thought would be, I would be interested in hearing what the two of you are interested in doing moving forward. I would like to move forward with this document. My personal belief is that when I said we had no ethics policy, I think of laws and ordinances and things
Right.
like that having consequences. And so aspirational is very nice, and I think we can all try to be as aspirational as possible towards following that code of ethics. But the reality is, if there's no teeth in the law, I'm not really a huge fan of laws like that. So I'm interested in seeing how we can sort of maybe do both in telling folks what we aspire to do as a city or as a community, and do it ethically, so on and so forth, but then also have some limits of, if this happens, this kicks in. When I brought up ethics and transparency, the only reason why they're lumped together was because of the conversation that Chad and I had lumped them together.
Right.
I don't necessarily see them as being one issue. They could be two separate issues. I mean, the word I tossed around on transparency was sort of a citizen's bill of rights on transparency or something like that, that would give citizens an understanding of, here's the rules that we as a body have decided to follow. Hopefully they're a little more stringent or open, if you will, than Comm is. I think there's some places where Comm skirts around privacy or skirts around the issue a little bit. So maybe take a look at those and see if we can adjust them. But larger than that, we've heard transparency as a cry from the public so many times that maybe, one thought that I've had is that we have a more open town hall discussion about what transparency is and what people define it as and what ideas they might have in terms of how we be more transparent. So I mean, those are just ideas that I've had. I want to throw them out there to you guys. I don't know what your thoughts are or how we move forward, but I'd be open to the dialogue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think anything in running cities, running states, anything in politics, it's never really a new discussion. It's usually something that's resurrected. I would believe that there are transparency and code of ethics rules out there that some cities have found that are very, very useful. And so I would like to see us, before we bring something to the council, to do a little bit more research. That's what the League of Municipalities is for, is to find out and do the research and get back to us on how other cities are doing this. So, and you can also find out a lot of information on Google too, but I really do think that this is appropriate, it's timely, and I would like to see us bring something forward to the council for a vote and make sure that it's something that includes the best of the best in the information that Chad is finding.
I guess I would just ask for some guidance on that issue in terms of research, because we've got Wichita, Olathe, Overland Park, Unified Government in Wyandotte County, Lawrence and Emporia don't have one. So if there are other cities or other places you want me to look, I'm more than happy to do that. I just kind of pulled so we usually go to. So if there's other places you want me to look, I'd be happy to do
And
that.
I know I looked on the league's website quite a bit and really didn't find much. So, but it was just a quick search. So maybe there's something a little bit deeper that we could look for. But it seemed like, and maybe I'm just reading it wrong, but it seemed like the issue was enough of a political hot button that nobody really has sort of hard stances on here's the best practice when it comes to a code of ethics policy.
Well, I think you'd probably find from their education person that puts together conferences and educational trainings by the league that they probably have covered this in depth many times over the years. So a lot of times you can get that information out of a conference presentation, that what is the best practices for code of ethics and transparency.
I'm more than happy to, I've been to the league, been through their publications, and they have publications on a lot of things, but not on the code of ethics, but I'll be happy to
Ask them to.
make contact and see
So-
if they have something.
Maybe that's one follow-up, is just see if there's some league documents out there. I don't
Right.
know, to me, some universities and things like that have studies of issues like this, if
Right.
there's any best practices, something like that. I know that those exist on other issues like road maintenance and
Yeah, the University of California, Santa Barbara, I believe, has an entire government ethics department, and I pulled a lot of information as I was going through this from their department on aspirational versus mandatory codes and what those look like. So, yeah, there's different agencies, government agencies that work, nonprofits that work on professionalism and ethics. So there's a lot of different places to look at, and what I kept coming back to was really the decision is, do you want to have a mandatory or an aspirational or a mix of both? And kind of, if I haven't heard it wrong, is looking at a mix of both of this is what we aspire to, but we do think that there's some ground floor rules that we should have in place.
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of what I'm hearing from the group. So.
You said something earlier about defining transparency and getting some community involvement in doing just that, which I think is a great idea. I would extend that to not just community. I'm not sure exactly how we would do this, but not just community input, but also input from the media who, I mean, obviously they would want to cover any event like that, but also to tell us where the community, to tell us where they see transparency as an issue. Transparency is a very difficult thing to define, and transparency is a perception that's held with each individual. But if we can come out and get some sort of public input into what they think transparency means, that we can respond to, instead of just us defining it, I think that would be a great idea. I'm not exactly sure how we would do that, whether we maybe, do it in a written form, have people can email us and suggest ideas, or maybe put something on the city website, or, have it as part of a town hall meeting, some of those kinds of ideas. But I really like the idea of us not defining transparency, us, letting citizens define transparency for us.
Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
Are you seeing transparency as being part of the code of ethics, or are you seeing it more as a separate document?
I would see it as part of the aspirational code of ethics. I mean, obviously flagrant violations of that or of COMA or CORA would be part of the, the mandatory effort of it. But I think if we can establish an ideal of what transparency means, and if we can get community buy-in and input into that, I think we can eliminate a lot of the perception problems that we have with regard to that issue right now.
trying to break the third wall. Tim, do you think that the Capital Journal would want to have a conversation with us about this issue?
The Capital Journal just did talk recently with the downtown people and held a poll about statues. So I would say it might be a good thing to suggest to publish for Greg Island.
Okay. Well, if I can sum up what I'm hearing, and hopefully point us in a direction. I think a town hall makes sense. If it's okay with the body, I would work towards establishing said town hall with this committee. If that, do I need to have a vote to do that, or? No, okay.
You're not taking an action that you're taking before council.
Okay, okay. So if there's no, are there any objections from either of my?
I would strenuously not object to that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would encourage, since our town hall meetings have had a limited turnout compared to 128,000 residents who live in the city, I would encourage that that also include information be on the website for input, you know, whether it's a survey or whether it's, you know, discussion that occurred, to widely market that information, because I think town hall meetings are the best way to get input, but it is always a limited input because of the turnout.
I would add to that, I agree completely with that. I would add to that I would like to see us pursue, much like Mr. Renter just said, you know, with our media partners throughout the community, a poll on what do you think transparency means, or that if they're willing to do that. Obviously we can't mandate any of that, but if they're willing to engage in that with us, I would like to pursue that also.
If I may.
Yep.
Not to, you know, be the legal wet blanket, but there are going to be issues that some people may feel are transparency issues that legally we can't engage in. There's always confidential information. There's information that can't be released. So I just want to put that out there, that if you have meetings with the media, I would really like to be I want to be a part of those meetings, so I know what we're agreeing to and can advise on that as well.
If what I would suggest, if we have a town hall meeting, is that at the start of the town hall meeting there be a review of Comm and Cora,
Right.
so that the audience understands, you know, here are the state statutes, here are the state rules that we already abide by. You know, what do we think of those, one way or the other? I think that kind of is a good starting point, and then hopefully people will define their ideas and thoughts about how open we can be based off of those rules. So that would be my thought. But
I think that's a great idea. That I think just as important in the perception issue is, you know, that people understand what we can or cannot say. There are things that we cannot be transparent about legally, and there are a lot of people that don't know that or aren't aware of that, and we need to, if we can lay those out in a public forum, you know, so that we all get on the same page, I would be very for that.
And in terms of promotion, I agree. Turnout's obviously going to be important. Should we give ourselves a month or two to organize this and put it together so that we have time to notify the public and let everybody know? Does anybody have any ideas a couple months from now, or?
I think it would probably take at least that, you know, it would take a fair amount of time. We'll probably want to get with staff and see, you know, how quick they can make something like this happen and get all the parties involved. So I wouldn't want to put a definitive deadline on it, but yeah, I would think within the next 90 days, if that's vague enough.
Word on the streets that we're going to get busy in May and June.
Right.
So,
Part of July.
you're nodding very quickly, Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Chairman, what I would suggest that we have this little budget thing coming up, and then you got summer. You might get more engagement if you wait until the kids go back to school, so probably September.
Okay.
Would be a better time frame, and that would give us time to pull all the research and organize it.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that? Am I missing anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of wanted to throw out an idea, and I talked to Sean about it, with the orientation that we have, that the CRC puts on. Because when you're elected as a council member, you are really thrown into everything quickly. You really don't have that prep time to understand what your role is, how you should act, how business is done. And I would like to see us work with CRC or somebody to do candidate education, not only candidate, because you can also include elected officials that are already elected, in some kind of educational training before they actually are elected to office. And I think that that would help to clarify what is your role, how are you supposed to act, and that type of thing, which all goes with transparency and code of ethics. So I would entertain that we include the discussion of that down, we've still got a year or whatever to do that type of thing. But I really think that we need some kind of education during the election process as to what to expect. And I know we had, 2 or 3 days of orientation, and it just, because it was so fast, and then you are in the office and you're supposed to know everything and you don't.
It's like opening a notebook that you received on the first day you were
Yeah.
on council about
Yeah.
6 months later, and wow, if I would have read this.
Yeah.
No, I understand where you're coming from, and I think that there are probably a couple of things. Obviously the public has the opportunity to establish meetings like that and trainings like that, but I would rather see us on the back end, after folks have been elected, the city staff be able to sit down and say, here's how we can work with you, here's how it works, here's your role, here's our role, just so those things are a little bit more clear. And I think it would benefit everybody in the long run to sort of be brought up to speed on how that relationship should work. So I would be happy to pursue that as well if you want to make that a object of future
Part of the,
discussion.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can do that.
Mr. Chairman, and I'd also add, that's one of our frustrations too, is we really, there's so much involved in the city that when you're elected, you just don't understand. And generally, people's observation of the city is what they see on Tuesday night. That's really the tip of the iceberg of what really happens. We've struggled mightily with trying to do the orientations and how much time can you do and when can you fit it in. So, we'd love to be part of that discussion to talk about from an intake perspective. We understand that there's things that can and should happen prior to that. We've talked about some educational opportunities, community university, and other things to help citizens understand what the city's all about. So we'd love to participate in that from the beginning all the way to when you become the mature, seasoned leaders like you all are now.
Okay, good. Well, then I'll figure something out moving forward on that and hopefully bring it back before the body. If not, loop it into what we're doing with this other stuff. So with that, I think we've wrapped up agenda item number 2. Do you have anything further?
Do you want me to start putting some bones on a code of ethics so that we're not waiting, or do you want to wait until after the town hall meeting for me to start formulating something? I'll do whichever. I just thought if there are things you wanted me to start, or staff to start working on.
I think given the time frame that it takes to put something like that together, I have no issue with you beginning.
Okay.
And most importantly, I think what I'm most concerned about initially is definitions. Obviously, the first section that you mentioned is sort of how do we define things and what
Right.
those roles are going to be. Because I think once we have those definitions, shaping the law becomes a little bit more, a little easier for us, if you will.
So I could just communicate with Jenny when I think I have something, and
Yeah.
then maybe
Yeah.
we could.
Forward on to the rest of the committee. Okay, and so we'll work on the town hall meeting. You'll work on getting us some more information to sort of bulk up what we've got right here. And so, does anybody have anything else for agenda item number 2? Okay, agenda item number 3, any other items to come before the committee? We have none?
I have none.
Okay. Well, I will just say, as chair of this committee for the second year now, I'm happy to hold committee meetings whenever we need to. I think what this body is capable of doing is vetting policy, looking at finance issues before they come before the council, just so that we can have some better understandings and better explanations and maybe some advocates, if you will, for some of the policy that we're working on. I truly believe that we shape our city through the legislative actions that we all are able to take. So choosing a correct path and choosing a direction is very important. And I'm, again, happy to have that happen right here in this committee. I would extend that offer to all council members and any staff that have something they'd like to have us look at. But hopefully we can get some good things done next year. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I started and stopped.
Can't wait for Memorial Day.
Best orientation is to